Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.9 ADC tier list. So, if you drop content, like, subscribe, and let's continue it. There were only two direct changes towards the ADC role this patch. We saw a buff towards Ashe and a nerf towards Kalista. In the case of Ashe buffs, I believe some of it is because of the unflinching buffs also within this patch, knowing that she would directly lose some power with more people opting into this minor rune, and just generally not being as powerful as some of the other options at the moment. The case of Kalista, she is #1 priority pick in competitive, primarily banned, which has led her to be in an unfortunate state where she has had to be nerfed for solo queue when she is already one of the weakest options there is for the average player, at least. In this case though, I believe they will probably end up buffing her back up if they can find the right levers to move. Right now though, she is definitely in a weaker spot, probably the one pick I'd recommend just completely avoiding when it comes to the ADC role. Other than that though, we saw a nerf towards Roa, which does affect the likes of Victor, who I have now removed from the bot lane tier list because his pick rate is just completely collapsed from compared to where it was when he first received his ASU. And other than that, yeah, most of the things stayed the same with some slight adjustments. For D tier then, leads off with Kalista. She is by far and away the weakest marksman option for solo queue, gated by certain pairings, needing very, very large amounts of mastery to really perform this champion. The nerfs were primarily targeted towards her early game, with the E base damage going down and losing 2 base AD, with some compensation through AD scaling. Always the concern with this though is how far can they go before Kalista top becomes really powerful. This is always one of the big concerns of giving level levers to a champion like Kalista, as that has been something in the past which has then obviously been cropped up and been very oppressive. Right now though, she's got a long way to go in both roles. She is definitely going to remain as the primary and sole D tier pick. The C tier then leads off with Brand, who is just in a bit of a weak state at the moment. He does have certain pairings which can elevate his placement within the tier list, but generalistically he is probably one of the weakest AP options you can go to in the bot lane of the main bot lane pool. Draven sits within the C tier alongside Samira. In case of Draven, he just underperforms for the average player. You need to put a lot of games into this champion, and akin to Samira, you need to snowball early advantages very aggressively. Otherwise, you'll find yourself being overtaken by the pace of the game a lot of the time. You do just have to be very comfortable playing these champions. If you're not, I would recommend looking elsewhere at the moment. If you are willing to sink a lot of time into them, really understand your limits, and are very consistent at closing out games early, then they can be very good options to climb with, and often two picks which are traditionally smurfed with if you are very comfortable on them. Ezreal is alright. He is not doing as well at the moment as he has been doing more over the patches previous to his nerfs. That being said though, he is a champion which just scales with the consistency and your macro and micro understanding with the game. If you can perform and consistently land skill shots, this pick can still be a very good option. He's very blindable, he can pair quite nicely with a lot of things, and he can output a large amounts of damage. His biggest concern traditionally is just some of his itemization can prohibit him from being as good at dealing with tanks, for example. But right now, though, I wouldn't recommend playing him, but if you already have him within your arsenal, he can be a good opt-in option if you are looking for something with a bit of safety through the E to escape ganks, or if you're playing around a pairing which maybe isn't going to be in lane as much as some of the other options. Phileas, I think, is a really good pick if you play him. If you don't, he's probably not in the greatest state to learn. I do think people should probably, just by people, I just mean players, should probably pick him up at some point, because he is a very, very powerful champion. If you understand the limits of this pick, he scales incredibly well, and he just prints damage. Give him items, and that is just a lot of the power within his kit. That being said though, yeah, I think he's slightly on the weaker side at the moment compared to where he can be. And yeah, that kind of prohibits him from being as much of a recommendable option. But if you already play him, I think he's a great option to consistently have within your pool. Kai'Sa is doing a bit better ever since her buffs. I would say she is a pretty high-end C-tier option. She can have really high highs. The problem is her build flexibility just isn't really there at the moment, combined with the fact that, yeah, you do just have to understand the limits of the champion, and she doesn't play like traditional marksman, which can make it a bit harder from from some of your other options to the likes of Kaiser, who requires a lot of mastery to really perform quite well on. Some of the other AP options within the C tier are the likes of Lux and Mel, where if you're already comfortable on them, they can still be really good options, but if you're not comfortable on them, they're probably towards the lower end of the mage kind of like spectrum within the bot lane. That being said though, I'm kind of thinking of moving Mel up to the B tier. She's definitely performing quite well in the bot lane compared to her other roles, so it is definitely a champion worth watching, especially with the mage item buffs going into next patch. So Mel could probably be bumped up to the B tier, and if you're looking for a mage to pick up at the moment, then Mel can be an option there for you. Zoe sits towards the high end of the C tier. Yumi is being nerfed in 25.10, and that will probably be a direct hit to Zoe, as she is one of the more commonly paired champions alongside the Yumi. Lulu is also being nerfed, and I believe that is also another one of those pairings, so probably going to take a bit of a hit. She will remain as a C2 option, though. She is a high C2 option, though, at the moment. I think she has got the ability to have high highs, but the meta just isn't really quite there for her in her current state, and that kind of limits how high she can go up in the placement on the tier list. Moving on to the B tier then. We lead off with Xayah, who is a great conditional ADC. I think if you can pick her in the right spot, she is in a very powerful spot at the moment. I think blind Xayah is really bait, and you should probably avoid it unless you are very, very proficient and comfortable with the champion, which can lead to like certain, maybe some other spots where you can pick the champion. But right now, I think she's pretty balanced. I think in the right spot, she's very good. In the wrong spot, you'll be punished for it. She can't deal with range that well, and oftentimes needs to be picked into pretty heavy committal engage. Ziggs and Veigar are the two B tier mage options. In the case of Ziggs, he's just not that performant at the moment. I believe he will benefit quite heavily with the Luden's cost reduction, as that is an item which he does very much like and want to go. In the case of Veigar, he is very low skewed, and enough Doroa does affect him to an extent within the bot lane. I think if you are like, let's say, gold and below, he is like almost probably even an S tier champion. If you go like gold, plat, emerald, then he probably sits in the A tier, and then diamond, emerald-ish, you're probably looking at B tier. His champion does quite aggressively fall off with rank, so definitely something worth watching. Ziggs, Smolder is being buffed quite aggressively in 25.10, so definitely a champion worth watching. He is in a fine spot as well at the moment. Like, I think Smolder is a perfectly fine champion. He's just a bit lower agency, as his early game isn't quite as oppressive as some of the other options on this list. So Smolder going into 25.10 will probably be an A tier option, maybe even S tier if the buffs just end up being as pretty like egregious as they might even look on paper. So yeah, Smolder definitely a champion worth watching. I would recommend playing him now, putting the games into him and getting very comfortable with his play pattern and where his strength lies as a champion. Varus is the good old jack of all trades champion. He obviously dominates in competitive and has done for a while, to the point where they are planning on nerfing him going into MSI this year. Right now though, he's a very middle of the pack ADC for solo queue. He requires oftentimes a lot of setup and certain like game states which aren't as easily achieved within solo queue, and that definitely does tag him a bit for like for his like rank on the tier list. But if you're very comfortable playing him and you play him all the way up into elite, and maybe you play like some level of competitive, and Varus is probably going to be one of your premier options and stay as a premier option, maybe even with the nerfs, depending on just how large they are, can maybe shift that. So yeah, Varus, both lethality and on hit, can be very solid options in the right game, and yeah, he's the jack of all trades champion, sits in the B tier at the moment. Corki is doing fine for the average player. He is obviously early game skewed, which does make him to an extent elite skewed, but he's also one of the few easier to play early game skewed champions within the ADC role, so I do like him for that. I think that does provide some level of value for average to lower rank players. That being said though, he's still early game skewed, and that does mark him down. Like, I think if you are not comfortable closing out games and you struggle with just the game length and they will loop back into the same thing. If you struggle with those kind of environments, then I think Corki can be a bit harder to pilot and probably sits as more like a middle of the pack B tier champion as well. Sivir sits in the B tier. I think she's a great counter pick, and if in counter pick scenarios she can probably be bumped up to the A tier. as an like a general pick, I think she just sits as a B tier option. She can sit back, clear waves, scales up quite nicely, isn't too interactive, but if you're looking for an ADC like that, then yeah, she can be perfect. So Sivir, I think she just sits as a B tier option. I think you can play her. I wouldn't say I wouldn't recommend her. I think she's just in the middle. She's in that like grey area. Sits as just a B tier option. Actually, one more champion in the B tier is Caitlyn. Caitlyn hasn't been performing that well as recent, and I already don't like the champion that much for average, and Lavilo. I think the problem with Caitlyn at the moment is the fact that Caitlyn wants to be advantageous in laning phase. She wants to abuse the fact that she is a 650 range champion, which can quite comfortably just push in waves and really harass someone out under tower. That is a very, very hard skill for lower and average elo players, to the point where I think if you can't do that comfortably, then I think you should just completely avoid the champion. That being said, though, she does have a carve which spikes early for that laning phase, and then carves down throughout the mid game, but spikes very hard later into the game at like your 4 or 5 item point, where you can just go back to being like a being a one-shot marksman, where one headshot can oftentimes just completely change the outcome of a fight. Is it a healthy play pattern? Probably not, but that is where she is currently at in her current state. She is just a bit weaker though at the moment, and that does make it harder to recommend her. So I'd say Caitlyn's a champion worth watching. Probably sits towards the middle low end of the B tier, maybe even high C tier if you're just not very comfortable piloting the pick. Moving on to the A tier, then we lead off with Twitch, and honestly, Vayne can both be around the same point. I think they're very good solo queue marksmen. They are champions which oftentimes kind of, given the right environment, or just given the solo queue environment, can have really, really pop-off moments and perform really well. The likes of Twitch, obviously his invis and his ability to snowball the game can be really effective. In the case of Vayne, her isolated like carry potential can be really high if you are able to perform very well on the champion. She is a champion which very heavily scales with the skill, and just the amount of games you put into her can be really rewarding. That being said, though, she doesn't translate as well in the ADC role for higher elos at the moment, and that can definitely be a pain point of the champion, especially when people punish her for being a shorter range option. For average to low elo, I think she's a great pick in her current state, and I would definitely recommend her as a mid to high end A tier option. Staying within the A tier is Lucian. I think if you pair him with the right things, he can maybe even be bumped up to the S tier. He's definitely one of the more performant marksmen at the moment, and he got buffed more recently, which also did help him. And yeah, I think if you're comfortable performing on him, you execute the combos well, you really utilize the strength of his mid game, he is a great A tier marksman to be playing at the moment. The case of Ashe, she sits towards the high end of the A tier now. This pick got buffed this patch, and the buffs were nice. It really helps her, I believe, 7 through 13, which is where the buffs really come online. Obviously, Ashe doesn't have a great last rank up incentive, which can hurt the champion, but her mid to early game is still very, very strong, and she still has a level of hyper carry capability if you give her the golden item she needs towards that mid to late game point. So Ashe, I think she's a great A tier champion at the moment. Bit easier to play, and can have, or just can be, a very strong champion across all stages of the game if played correctly. Some of the major options include the likes of Hui and Karthus and Swain and Seraphine. In the case of how would I order these? I honestly think Seraphine's I maybe overrate Seraphine. I think Seraphine's probably more like a mid A tier champion rather than a high A tier champion. Swain, I think, is one of the best mages into specific compositions. Like, he is like an S plus option into low damage, tankier compositions, but struggles a bit more into range, and that can probably drop him down to the B tier. In the case of Karthus, I think if you play him, he's an incredible option. If you don't play him, he's a very hard champion to play, and I would basically not recommend him. In the case of Hui, I think he is a very, very good pick. In fact, I would recommend Hui as probably my premier mage at the moment. If you sink the games into him, he's rewarding, and you will feel good for having the games on the champion. That being said, though, mages always are going to have some level of win rate, or just like strength, through people not understanding how to play against them as well. And if people understand how to play against your champion, or play maybe matchups which you aren't as familiar with, that can definitely punish these picks. So something to be aware of, but Hui is probably my number one mage option. I think Swain, great conditionally, and I think Seraphine Silo, jack of all trades, can be really good in a lot of spots pick. Moving on to the S tier then, we're going to lead off with Tristana, who I'm bumping back up from the top of the A tier to the S tier. I dropped her down with the nerfs, and I believe she's still around the same point, but yeah, just gone from the low end of the, or the high end of the A tier to the low end of the S tier. She's still one of the best solo queue options you can go to, especially if you're very comfortable with the champion. Some of the more niche options include the likes of Kog'Maw and Nyla. Kog'Maw is very heavily misunderstood with the item Ginsu's. Ginsu's is an incredibly early game skewed item. That is something people probably, I mean, some people have caught on, some people probably need to like come to the conclusion or just the realization of where the strength in that item lies, and play around the fact that Kog'Maw can be really oppressive early on to the game, especially with the power of the W, and maybe isn't quite as strong as people believe he is later on into the game, although he has some level of hyper carry capability when paired with the right champions into the right compositions. Nyla, I think, is blatantly overpowered. She's also very, very unpopular, which makes it hard for Riot to ever really willingly nerf her. I played against a Nyla today, maybe one of the only Nyla, like high master Nyla OTPs on EUS, and she just completely ran the game because the amount of damage her champion has within her kit, combined with how overpowered that W ability is in certain compositions, just makes her very strong. Pair her with the right things, and I mean, like, if you pair her with it, like someone who you duo with, who plays maybe like your Tareks and stuff, she's an incredible pick, and I think if she was played more, she would probably be the premier pick on this tier list, but she's just so niche, and it makes it hard to rate her as a champion. Yasuo, I do think, is an incredible bot laner. This pick has obviously got some level of condition with pairings, like you have to pair him with a knockup, and you kind of want, I mean, you want to like run things like exhaust and play quite oppressively in the early laning phase, and if you can like pull that off, then I think this champion's great. For you, if you struggle a bit more with like some of the melee options as an ADC, then Yasuo may not be the option you want to go to. And in my case, I have some more traditional marksmen which I recommend. But Yasuo, I think if you play him already, he's an incredible pick in the bot lane at the moment. And it's probably just outright his strongest role. That being said, though, I think he is just great generalistically at the moment. So sits as an S tier pick. MF and Jhin are my two high S tier options. MF for her ease of play, the kind of like the idea of the playstyle, and just how much damage this pick can output, I think are all very valuable at the moment, and I think she's very deserving of a high S tier spot. Jhin, with the buffs he received not too long ago, really benefited from them. He scales a lot better now and can output a huge amount of damage, and yeah, I think the utility the champion can provide alongside that burst can be all very, very valuable outputs. And then Jinx, I'm going to bump her back up to the S tier because I think she is just outright the number one option I'm going to recommend at the moment, especially if she's just not going to be nerfed or has no direct changes within sight. I would play her if you mained ADC. Most people do just play her. She, I believe, is just outright the most popular marksman in the role at the moment, and rightfully so. I think this pick is great. She can snowball very easily off 2-3 kills with a laning phase. She can perform well in laning phase, especially if you understand the ADC trading patterns. Her range from rocket form combined with her wave clear can all be very, very powerful things. So Jinx is going to be my premier marksman of the patch. Kalista is my only real recommended just avoid champion. Some can vary depending on how many games you put into them, but yeah, Jinx, Jhin, MF, Tristana. If you're looking for something a bit more niche, then yeah, your Yasuo, your Nylas, your Kog'Maws can all be good options. Those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.